muted until...
Hello, I'm Aileen and I'm a priestess of Cerridwen. I'm here tonight with Gail and Emma, my sister priestesses of Cerridwen, and we're going to hear from Gail and Emma about the Witch's Walk. Very fitting as we move towards Samhain. So I'm going to hand over to Gail.
Thanks, Aileen. So B. Helligan, who's the adoratrix of Cerridwen and our tutor on the spirals of the training to become a priestess of Cerridwen, had the inspiration in Glastonbury to start a walk around the town in remembrance of those who died during the historic witchcraft persecutions. And this started in 2016. So she's been doing this walk for a number of years now and gathering more and more people to come along each year that she's been doing it. So I haven't been on the walk myself, the actual in-person walk, but from what I understand, it's split between a ceremony in the goddess temple and then walking around the town, stopping at various different points where B will talk and where drumming and singing can take place, and people can think about those who were involved in the persecution, who were accused and who were ultimately tortured and executed. And so the places that they visit all have a connection with that story. And it's a healing process to remember people, but also to heal the generational trauma that has come down the generations since then, and to help us remember and make sure it never happens again. So I was aware that she was doing the in-person, but because I live now, I come from Scotland, but I live in mid Wales, and to get to Glastonbury is a good, 4.5 hours or so by car. So I couldn't make it to the in-person event. So when I got wind of the fact that Emma was putting together a virtual witches walk, I thought, that's it, I'm in. So maybe Emma could tell us about it.
Yeah, Emma, could you tell us a wee bit about what inspired that first virtual Witches Walk?
Yeah, of course. It was, I mean, I think we, on our spiral, it was it was a virtual spiral. So it was something that we were always aware of, that even from the beginning, we were all, at least I feel we were always on the lookout for different ways to continue to do the sort of work we do virtually or online. So I suppose in that way, when I heard about the Witches Walk at Glastonbury, it sparked something. I thought, I really, really want to do, I want to be able to do something like that online. And it was a big I think it is a challenge, because obviously so much of a Witches Walk is actually moving from location to location. And it was quite a challenge to think about how to do that online. But we've always, as a spiral, sort of risen to that, challenge, because we have to, if we're going to, there's so many of us from different parts of the world, that we have to learn how to make meaningful ceremony and rituals. Well, it has to be meaningful. It can't just be a kind of pale representation. It's got to have that spirit around it of the original event, but also maybe something that we can give to it as well. But the inspiration for the naming of the witches, which is something that was really, really important, I think, in the first Witches Walk we did last year online, actually goes back even further than my training or anything that we did with the Cerridwen course. And that was years ago when I was a postgrad student. I was involved in putting together in Edinburgh, and we did about 3 of them, I think, 2 or 3 of them. I call it a goddess conference. We didn't call it that at the time. We the powers that be intervened, and we called it a divine feminine conference, but it was a goddess conference. And the first one we had was around Samhain, and we had academic papers and things like that at it, but we also had space for workshops and ritual ceremony. And I was asked to do one of the ceremonies, and actually I based it on the naming of the accused witches in the Edinburgh area. So I knew before we even did it online that the naming can be powerful, because I witnessed that. It took place in a church of all places in the centre of Edinburgh, and where the location of the conference was. And I got each person I had names written down of the accused witches in Edinburgh and the surrounding area, and handed them to the people. There were maybe about 50 people, and I'll never forget it, because each person named and lit a candle for that woman. I think there were some men included as well, and one of I just remember the sobbing in the background, and one woman had been given, and it was just complete chance, well, maybe not chance, had been given the name of one of her or someone that she can take her family tree back to, and it was just so powerful. She knew, she had done a lot of digging and in the records, and so she had that connection. But so many people felt that power of the naming of names. So that was I'll never forget that workshop and that conference, and it's something that I wanted to try and recreate, but in a different way, obviously, in a Cerridwen inspired way. But it was something that has stayed with me for many years. So that was the initial inspiration.
Well, that sounds like such a powerful experience that you had all those years ago. And how did you said earlier on about how you were working in a virtual environment. How did you recreate then that process of this, of walking, of the stepping into towards Sawain? What did you do to make that magic online?
Yeah, well, I got everyone that was involved to send in pictures of places close to them, landscapes, memorials, all of that kind of thing, connected to the witch trials, or even places that have a connection to witches of some sort in their area. So it doesn't have to be the witch trials, but most of it I think that we got kind of centered around the trials. And we put together, not me, I'm not so great with technology, but we put together a video with some music underneath to recreate the sense of distance and travel through the picture. So that was the walk bit. I felt the walk had to be in there. So there were locations right across the world. We had places in America and Italy, and throughout Europe actually, and then more specifically, and I know that Gail did a lot of traveling around parts of central Scotland on little pilgrimages. And I think that is actually just to take pictures, and I think that is something that it encouraged, because I realized it didn't just happen in that one night. A lot of the magic happened before it, in the preparation and the lead up to it, because people did either do some research on specific accused witches, or they went out into their landscape to take the pictures for the video. So I think the magic had already happened, and in the lead up.
And also the journey
well.
of doing that allowed conversations
Absolutely.
to happen. And sometimes conversations that needed to happen, like with relatives that you maybe had. I mean, and for me, during the training, to stand up and say, I am a priestess of Cerridwen, we did this exercise which let us do with the Vesica Piscis. So you put in the one side all the things that were holding you back from standing in your power and being your authentic self, and saying, this is me, this is what I'm doing as a priestess and serving. So you had on the one side all the things that were holding you back, and then you had on the other side what you wanted your priestess self to be like, and to offer service and all that. And then in the middle of the center of the lozenge was what would have to happen to make it transform. And that was a really powerful exercise for me. But a lot of the stuff that was in the left-hand side of my Vescopiskis was fear of people's reaction to what I was about. You know, would people ostracize me in my community? Would I have problems at work because of it? You know, and it was irrational amounts of fear about stepping forward and saying, this is what I'm doing and who I'm serving and what I'm going to do for my community. And I started thinking, because I grew up in Edinburgh as well, and we didn't have anything in the curriculum that would teach us about Scottish history at all, frankly, but not about the witchcraft persecutions. And I remember seeing at the top of the Royal Mile, you know, the Witch's Well, which has it's a John Duncan, who's an amazing artist anyway, but had been commissioned to do this, and it's just a plaque really on the wall beside the castle esplanade, where many women mainly and some men lost their lives. But it's got the picture of the supposed nice, beautiful, good witch on the one side, and the hag with the big, you know, stereotypical nose who was actually up to no good on the other side. And I remember even age 10 thinking, is that all there is to mark what's happened? And it's not like that. It's not, but these are all women, and what is this black and white thing and all that? So I think it woke up a seed in me that started sort of way back then. And also, I think for myself, there was this past life element. So I remember when I was 8 and I was in primary school, and I wrote an essay just in a class exercise, and it was reliving being chased by men with dogs and running from my village and stumbling down this riverbank and having to hide in the river under the roots of the tree, and being caught and being hauled out with a rope around my neck from where I was hiding and being taken off and hanged. Now, for an 8-year-old child to write that in such detail and everything, you know, for me, I think that was definitely a past life. And I've always had a thing about people touching me around the throat and things. So I think for a lot of people, this work brings back all those past life memories. And but for me, going around East Lothian and visiting places where there's statues and memorials now, or where key events happened, because of the inspiration from Emma's virtual witches walk, it let me have conversations, for example, with my stepmother. My stepmother was willing to stick me in her car and drive me around, you know, to Preston Pans and different places and get in the spirit of it all, but she didn't really get why I was doing it. But she knew quite a bit actually about the different locations and stuff that she shared with me. But she said, do you know, if it was still like this today, Gail, you'd be first against the wall, wouldn't you? She said. And it's like, well, yes, probably, yes. But anyway, so I think it helped us to have these kind of conversations with people. And I thought the videos everyone did in advance, where they picked a particular woman's story to tell, and it had quite a long lead up, didn't it, Emma? And it was really fantastic. They were brilliant. Over to you again.
I think we had about 6 videos in the end, and we could have had more. That's definite. You know, it was only after did them, we had a rough idea. We tried to get them kind of geographically spread out. You know, we had something from Cornwall and something from Italy, and that kind of thing. But the hearing about those stories, the idea was really just to advertise it really on the lead up. But I think the videos took on a life of their own, and and just hearing, and we had an excellent one from Pendle, obviously, and that really sparked a lot of people. And the videos really, I think, set the mood, but took it beyond. I mean, because there's no way we tried to keep it to an hour. I think the final ceremony was an hour and a half. There's no way we could have crammed any more in. So the videos also kind of spilled. You know, we caught some of the spillage from that.
And the videos humanized the
definitely
experience. So you can hear statistics, 4,000 accused, and but actually one woman's story and what happened to her brings it home.
Yeah, and storytelling is so important, I think, with these things as well. And I think the thing I noticed after, in the aftermath of the actual ceremony, was how many of us then really still had work to do around it. And obviously even now, I mean, it's not going to be done in a year or so, healing the witch wound, but even the feelings that came up from that one ceremony, a few weeks later, I was still going back to these sites and leaving little offerings and processing it. And I know that other people had that experience too. So yeah, it had an effect beyond that one evening.
It felt that there was a real momentum that built, that people didn't want to let it go afterwards.
Yeah.
And you did a wonderful piece about, I remember in the ceremony, about blessing the land, and that really struck me, that these things leave a mark, not just in our sort of generational memories and everything, ancestral memories, but actually on the land that where these atrocities took place. And your blessing of the land was really really powerful.
Is there anything that you can tell us about that then, about that and any other elements of the actual live event itself?
Yeah, I think I realised at the beginning that the plants were going to be really important, and because throughout the first spiral, obviously we have the Cerridwen's wheel with all the plants and the trees on it, and so the little bits of research that I did throughout the year, the witch aspect just kept coming back, with rowan and blackthorn and other plants and trees. So I wanted to include them because they feel like people, the plants feel like witches too in some ways. You've got mugwort and and so many of those plants have had some kind of connection to witches over time and wise women and Sunarag. So I was really keen to bring that into this ceremony too, but tie it into the witch trials, and I did a bit of research throughout the year, so it kind of came up at Samhain, but the gorse and some of the other trees, the wood was actually used on the pyres that burned the witches, and it was this kind of strange turn of the people viewed the authorities viewed these trees as being witch trees, so it was as if they were turning the magic back against the witches by burning them on the and I found that incredibly affecting and actually horrific, because not just from the women's and men's standpoint, but the plants and the trees themselves. I felt there must be some kind of residue, and we know that blackthorn, for example, still has that reputation, and I've got a background in Gaelic research, and even now, some of the trees will be named in even modern poems as evil trees or bad trees, and some will be good trees. And I do wonder how much of that has to do with the connotations of magic and that sort of thing as well. So I wanted to include the plants in the ceremony. So I had back in, I think, the April or May, had picked some, and not knowing that we were going to do this ceremony, it was just for my own work with that. I had picked some blackthorn flowers and made a blackthorn essence. And my plan had been, around that time of the darker half of the year, I was going to go out to some of my witch sites that places like the Market Cross and that places that I knew witches would have been tried or executed, in places in Edinburgh as well. Like Gail mentioned the Castle Esplanade, and that I was definitely going there, and I was going to pour some of the essence and do a little personal ritual. But then when we decided to do the virtual walk, I thought, why not include that in with the ceremony? So the blessing of the land and those, and we got some absolutely gorgeous poems from some sisters who talked about I suppose again almost the past life memory in relation to those plants, because we all know as as walkers on that path that sometimes a plant or a tree just connects with you, and how much of that is from prior experience from times gone by with that plant or tree. So that was the idea.
Well, it sounds like such an incredibly powerful build-up. And I mean, Gail shared her story, and that's just one conversation that grew out of all of these videos and all of that work. So it's quite something to think about, all the other conversations that your work has sparked everywhere else. You both touched on the fact that, as well as before the event, there was all of this magical lead up, but also after the event itself, there was even more after that. What happened next?
So we thought we wanted to keep the momentum going, and we wanted to do some co-creation. So as a community of sisters and priestesses and priests of Cerridwen, that we would try to engage each other in a co-creation. So the first thing about that was to set our intention, to look at our individual intentions with regard to the work, and then to see if there was a shared, collective vision around the work. And so we had some Zoom sessions that were open to anyone who wanted to come along to talk about setting intention. We did it in quite a ritualistic way. So we would start, with a proper casting of the circle and singing together and opening ourselves up to, thank Goddess and call in. So, we did it in quite a sort of formal way, but it was a chance for us to share the experiences that we were going through as a result of the work we'd done or we were doing, what we were working on creatively around it, any news that we'd heard around the topic, because there was an awful lot obviously going on at that time. In Scotland in particular, there was the Witches of Scotland campaign, looking for an apology and a legal pardon for those who were condemned as witches, and also to get a momentum for a memorial together. But also in other countries, there were discussions and shifts happening around this topic. So it seemed, it was quite a current thing to be engaged with. So International Women's Day became a focus for us. And we thought, well, we've been doing all this work on setting intentions. And International Women's Day last year was about, the theme was breaking the bias. And so much of what was done in the historic persecutions, we felt was about keeping the vulnerable down, denying women a voice, disenfranchising women, and women from all walks of life, and some men, and in some countries only men. So it's very different around the world, but that were involved in the persecution. They came from all walks of life, different stages of life, but there were certain archetypes that stood out. So if you were somebody who was a widow and moved to a new area, so you were a stranger and a widow, and especially if you had some means of support of your own, some independence, then that could provide multiple reasons why you might be targeted. So we thought it was worth us looking at the International Women's Day and the breaking the bias theme through the lens of the historic witchcraft persecutions. So what we did was we worked together on a statement that we could put out on behalf of the priestesses and sisters and priests and brothers of Cerridwen, to state our position on this, and the fact that although we are acknowledging the historic suffering and trying to remember from that so that we can make sure that never happens again, actually it's still going on in parts of the world now. So the vulnerable are still being persecuted for perceived witchcraft or their actual religious beliefs. And I do understand there's a massive difference there, and acknowledge that. So what we wanted was to acknowledge that the witch trials and persecutions are still a living reality in parts of the world, and that bias leads to the targeting of vulnerable people, mainly women, children, and those with disabilities. And I've got the actual statement here. I won't read the whole thing, but we said at the end, we assert and uphold the right of women everywhere to freedom of religious expression, to choose if we wish to self-identify as witches and to practice our magic without fear of persecution. As Cerridwen's kin, we are proud of our heritage of healing and magic. The wisdom, inspiration, and transformation of the cauldron of Awen is there for us and for all who seek it. We should all feel confident to be our full, true selves in the world without fear of reprisal. Collectively, we can break the bias. So it was really encouraging to work together in that way. And so after that happened and we put that statement out, we thought we'd keep going. And so we sort of took inspiration then from Emma's blessing of the land, and we thought, well, we could develop an elemental blessing that would look at land, so earth, would look at water, would look at fire, and would look at air, and would look at it, the negative things that happen to those elements as a result of the persecutions, and how could we, using Cerridwen's teachings and examples, transform those into positive features. So, for example, this is a sort of small example, there was an awful lot of talking behind people's backs and gossiping and pointing the finger at neighbours and negative use of voice and breath, people being accused of cursing, people who spoke out and just used their voice assertively being, called quarrelsome dames and, persecuted because of speaking out. So but we could transform that into a positive where now we can join together and lift our voices together in song, or we can chant a healing chant together. So instead of speaking out against each other and dividing with our voices, we could help ourselves to join in community and support each other and bring that sense of sisterhood and safety with other women and generally in community back. So between us all, and I should put a shout out to our sister Leanne, who was joining us from Australia. So she was having to get up really incredibly early, but she was so devoted to the task that she was, very reliably there. So hats off, really. So we all worked on this idea of this elemental blessing. Not really sure what we were going to do. Was it going to be an online event, or how are we going to manifest it? And then B turned around and said, oh, I'm going to hold an Avalon Cauldron gathering pretty soon. We need contributions. And so it was an in-person event in Glastonbury. And so we were like, well, we'd like to offer something, but it was in person. So there was that tension then between, we were a virtual group and we'd been co-creating everything virtually, but there was going to have to be a physical ritual in the cauldron gathering, which some of us wouldn't be able to make. So anyway, we did go ahead and we did do this workshop, and with a view to doing further online events, afterwards. And the event was amazing. So there were some people there who had come just to participate and weren't on the training, but most of us were on first, second spirals or had passed through the training already. So there was, and that's one of the good things I think about our virtual witches walk work, has been that it's cut across these different spiral sort of, they're not divisions, but you know what I mean, it's brought everyone together and allowed people from different year groups to mix, which I think has been brilliant. And so yeah, the actual event was, the ritual was really moving and everybody took part, and there was a frisson of real, magic in the air. And I won't go into too much detail about what exactly happened, but it ended up with us brewing a cauldron of water from the Red Spring in Glastonbury, the White Spring, and from Llyntegid, Lake Bala in Wales. And we into that had each added botanicals, which Emma had collected, the beautiful gorse petals and the rowan berries, and we had heather, and we had blackthorn flowers. And as Emma said, it's absolutely awful that these were used in pyres deliberately. It has to be deliberately. And we know that because the records that are left behind of the bills that were sent to the families of those that were put on the pyres, and they had to pay for everything involved in that procedure. It's just horrendous. But anyway, we had the botanicals, and they went into the cauldron, and then we all took turns in chanting and in walking and in stirring and in remembering and putting our intentions into the healing and the respect and the honouring and remembering of those that were involved, and the hopes for our future that we could make sure this thing never happens again. And I remember Sidika afterwards in the lunch break stirring and stirring and stirring at the cauldron, which was beautiful. And at the end of it, we had then distilled that liquid into glass bottles, and each could take one to carry on the work. So wherever we went back to use it as a way of doing elemental blessing, an elixir to bless the land where we lived. So that again had a tail afterwards that's continuing on really to this day. And now we're all still co-creating, but towards the next virtual witches walk.
Obviously, co-creation is one of the virtues of Cerridwen that we cover in our training, and I think that everything that you've described and you've spoken about with such passion, I think that encompasses so perfectly, what co-creation can achieve. I love the shape shifting as well from Bee's initial in-person virtual walk to in-person witch walk to a virtual walk, and then you morph into another in-person gathering, and now we come back to Emma with another virtual event, which is this year's. So can you tell us a wee bit about that and what you've got planned?
Yeah, I think throughout this year we've been thinking of, and so many people, again at co-creation, so many people have put in ideas into this, and a lot of it came up from our little meetings that we had. Even things like, we were recommending books to each other, and lots of different things. But one of the things that kept coming up again and again was the different aspects of the accused, the witch, so that's what we've decided to concentrate on this year, because we felt the naming of the names was so powerful last year. You could, there are enough names that you could do it for, for many years, unfortunately, in that way. But moving towards perhaps more the symbolism of the witch and what that means. But throughout this year, we've obviously been looking back, at the ancestors and at the sense of what had gone before, and Gail touched on it beautifully when she talked about how that then affects us in the present. So that's what we're going to be looking at this year. We're going to have different aspects of the witch, but from a past perspective and a present one, and how that connects in, and how the past obviously affects the present. But to a certain extent, I'm hoping that the magic that we create in the ceremony this year, perhaps in some ways it's not a linear, time for us isn't linear, and so the thread that connects from past to present perhaps also takes healing back to the past. So that thread of connection is going to be one of the focuses of the virtual witches walk this year. So the hope is to have the symbols of the witch, whether that be midwife or wise woman or independent woman or seer, all the different things that have often been part of the negative, but in some ways we're still doing, there's still things like that for people now, aspects of that now. So, and it has huge importance in the present, particularly with things like midwifery and the birth doula, in relation to so much of what's been discussed this year across the world in relation to the rights of women and that kind of thing. So that's the hope, that this year we'll explore a bit of that in the hour and a half that we have. So.
And when is the virtual event this year, so that people can tune in and watch and find it for themselves?
It's going to be the 3rd of November this year, so a little bit earlier than it was last year. I think we had last year's was on Old Savin, but this year's a little bit early. So the 3rd of November at 7:30.
Okay, great.
British time. So.
And the in-person one is on the 30th of October.
That's right.
Not sure about the time though. Sorry.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you both very much. I've got one question, which, to be honest, I think you've both covered, and as we've been talking tonight. But I would like you just to answer this one. Why is it important to keep doing this?
On a personal note, it's a continuation of remembrance, and in fact, and this was not meant, but I found this today, and it was behind me. This is one of this, and I forgot this was sitting here on my bookcase. This is part of what we did at the Cauldron Gathering. Gail had these little slices of wood that we wrote our intentions on, and mine was bless their memory, we are connected. And I found that today, and I didn't know you were going to ask me that question, but yeah, I think that's why it's important. It's the connection, the memory, but also how that affects us now. We have to remember, and we have to keep that connection.
I think it's partly honouring the ancestors and what happened to them, acknowledging their existence, because in some cases, when you look at the wonderful database that the University of Edinburgh has put together, and you search for women, they won't even have a name. It'll be, the wife of the miller, or sundry witches, so all of that horror happened to them, and they couldn't defend themselves at their trial. They couldn't use their own voices in defense of themselves, and they were obliterated without a trace of what it was to be that woman. And I think so honoring them as best we can, remembering them, is important, not just for them, but also as a healing for us as a community. But I think it's important as well for us to be remembering in a way to reclaim, so to see what's happened in the suppression of women as a result of the patriarchal process, and to make it work together to make it acceptable again, to speak out and say what we think, and to trust each other, to have each other's backs, to be a community and a circle of supportive sisters and brothers, and to sort of reclaim what was lost and move forwards. I mean, my stepmother, again, I'm sure she won't mind me saying, but she was a history teacher at school, secondary schools, but she was totally unaware of the fact that there were ever matrifocal societies, that there had ever been a history of goddess worship before there was the male god worship. And we've lost so much of that kind of collective memory. But what happened with that particular historic witchcraft persecution in the sort of 16th and 17th centuries was such a setback for vulnerable people, but for women in particular. So reclaiming is important, I think. And also it's just about what's important, what's the right way of being for us, and how we should treat each other with respect, and that sort of sense of community, and acknowledging that this is not a historic issue. It's still happening in parts of the world, and I know Professor Ronald Hutton has done a lot of work, internationally, so not looking back to get pardons for historic persecutions, but to work actively to stop what's going on now around the world. And so, there's lots of people like Professor Hutton that are engaged in that work. So it's still current and it's still really important. And by going through these processes of ritual that we do, we're connecting ourselves with something larger than, you know, just this reality. We're connecting to different realms and allowing that healing to pass and connect, with Cerridwen overseeing everything.
Gail, Emma, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us tonight. I suspect that it's just it's just a fraction of the real magic that sits behind all the work that you've been doing for such a long time, and that you're still doing as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Aileen.
Thank
It's been
you.
great. And thanks to everyone who's been involved in the process, and lots of
Absolutely.
chances to keep being involved in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thanks.